All right, this is going to be the interactive part of the afternoon plenary. By a quick show of hands, over the past year, who has found themselves in a disagreement with a colleague over the events in Israel? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm seeing about 40%. All right, and by the way, I'm realizing that some of you might be sitting next to your bosses. Don't worry about it. It's dark, they can't see. It's fair game. Okay, who's gotten into an argument with a friend over the events of Israel? Raise your hand. Okay, about 3/4 of you. Now, what about with a member of your family? I see both my brothers raising their hand. Okay. Well, here's the reality. Whether you raised your hand or not, here's the truth. We are all the beneficiaries. We are the heirs of a tradition that values a good old-fashioned argument. As Rabbi Buchdahl just noted, since Abraham first argued with the Almighty, principled disagreement has been etched into the text, into the laws, into the stories that make up our heritage. As Rabbi David Wolpe wrote in the pages of the journal SAPIR, to err is human, to disagree, Jewish. As a community, we rightly take great pride in the idea that disputation is embedded in our cultural DNA. But that proverbial trait, left to its own devices, can also be a source of tension. 25 years ago, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs asked the following question: how do you create fraternity in a people as fractious as the Jews? The rabbi's answer, he said, lay in translating conflict into argument and making argument itself the pulse of intellectual life. Our tradition beckons us not to argue, or not just to argue, but to argue well, to argue better. And it is in that spirit that we created the SAPIR debates, to feature and to model spirited civil exchanges on the most consequential issues facing our Jewish community today.
And we are thrilled to bring the SAPIR debate to the General Assembly stage, right here with all of you. Our goal this afternoon is to continue strengthening a communal muscle that is also part of our lineage, one that prizes a good faith argument, challenges our preconceptions, and opens up the possibility of learning something new. So, as you listen, we ask you to do two things. First, lean in, not just to what you agree with, but to what makes you uncomfortable. And second, stay tuned to one of the debate's signature moments, a segment called One Good Point. At the end of the debate, our moderator will ask each participant to highlight one argument from the other side that they found compelling. It's not easy. In fact, it's quite hard. It requires active listening, critical thinking, and the humility to entertain a new perspective. But that's what this space and this community are all about.
If you are sitting in this audience, the 2,000 of you, your voice is instrumental to today's program, because at both the beginning and at the end of the debate, we'll ask you to vote on this evening's question: is there a realistic future for the two-state solution? We will reveal the results at the conclusion to see whether and how opinions have shifted or not. So let's get started. If you haven't yet, please take out your phones and register your vote by scanning the QR code on your playbill or using the screen behind us. Again, your take: is there a realistic future for the two-state solution, yes or no? And lest there be any concern, this is all completely anonymous.
As you cast your votes, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of today's debate. Tamar Ish-Shalom is an award-winning journalist and one of the most recognized news anchors on Israeli television. For more than a decade, she anchored the primetime edition of Channel 10 News. Today, she serves as a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute and hosts the podcast Jewish Crossroads, where she explores the challenges and possibilities of Jewish life today. Please join us in welcoming Tamar Ish-Shalom to the General Assembly stage.
Thank you, Sarah and Hanan, for that warm introduction. It's an honor to be on this illustrious stage at the General Assembly and to moderate this SAPIR debate on the question before us this evening. Is there a realistic future for the two-state solution? When the Oslo Accords were signed, I was a girl of bat mitzvah age. My family lived near the Foreign Ministry's official residence in Jerusalem, and the neighbor in that house was Foreign Minister Shimon Peres. On the eve of Rosh Hashanah, I went around delivering handmade holiday cards I prepared to our neighbors. When I reached his residence, the security guard invited me to step inside and give it to him personally. It was before the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin, a moment when such things were still possible. A week later, I received a formal letter in the mail from Minister Peres. He thanked me for the card and wrote that he hoped that one day the relations between us and our Palestinian neighbors would be as warm as those between the neighbors on our street. That hope did not materialize, nor did the new Middle East he envisioned. Of course, the new Middle East has emerged before our eyes over the past 2 decades, perhaps better in some ways and worse in others, but certainly very different from the dreams of Oslo. For some, it can feel as though our political imagination has remained frozen in time. The fundamental disagreements between supporters and opponents of a Palestinian state persist, yet the relevance of the discussion has drifted far from the daily lives of Israelis, especially over the past decade. Surveys show that for many Israelis, the attacks of October 7 pushed the idea of a peaceful Palestinian state even further out of reach. Yet internationally, 2 years later, we see renewed attention to the two-state concept. Recently, several Western nations recognized the state of Palestine, while Saudi Arabia, pressured by President Trump to move toward normalization with Israel, signaled that any deal would require Israel to reconsider its stance on a Palestinian state. For decades, the majority of American Jews have supported the paradigm of 2 states for 2 people, in part because it was perceived as the only resolution that enabled Israel to retain its Jewish and democratic character. And yet, of late, we're beginning to see cracks in support for the viability of this ideal, even among some mainstream Jewish organizations. So, tonight, we ask the essential question: is there a realistic future for the two-state solution? There are no easy answers, of course, but we are very fortunate to have on stage 2 distinguished individuals to help us unpack these heavy issues. Answering yes to tonight's proposition is Michael Koplow. Michael is the Chief Policy Officer for the Israel Policy Forum, an organization dedicated to building support for a secure Jewish democratic Israel and to advancing a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on 2 states. Please join me in welcoming Michael Koplow. And answering no to the proposed question is John Podhoretz. John serves as editor of Commentary Magazine, which this month celebrated 80 years since its founding. John is also the host of its popular daily podcast. Please join me in welcoming John Podhoretz. Shalom chaverim. Hello, friends. And we will begin with opening remarks from both of our speakers. As for who will start, that was decided by a quick coin toss backstage, which was a challenge because everyone is cashless these days. But thankfully, very deep in my purse, I found 10 Israeli shekel coin, and the one starting is you, John. So you're first to address an identical question. Is there a realistic future for the two-state solution?
There is a future for the two-state solution. It is not a realistic future at the present time or for at least a generation. Let me just take you back 88 years to July 7th, 1937, the first proposal of a two-state solution. The Peel Commission convened and proposed a two-state solution, 80% Arab, 20% Jew. Jews believed at the time that this was a betrayal of the promise made by Arthur Balfour in the Balfour Declaration, which was pretty much for the entire mandate shebang, and urged many people in the Yishuv, urged David Ben-Gurion to reject the deal, and he did not. He accepted the Peel Commission's recommendation, and the Arab population of Mandatory Palestine rejected it. 1937, 1947, 1948, partition plan at the UN, accepted by Israel or by the Jews, rejected by the Arabs, who started a 22-state war against Israel, settled with an armistice in 1949. 1967, after the Six-Day War, Arab countries met in Khartoum, trying to figure out what to do after this devastating loss, and they came up with 3 no's. Did they come up with, let's make a deal with the Israelis? No. No peace, no negotiations, no recognition. The 3 no's of Khartoum. 1993, the Oslo Accords. A two-state solution formally agreed to by Israel and in theory by the newly invented Palestinian Authority that was to begin its process toward the creation of a Palestinian state after a 4-year period in which Israel would make certain guarantees and commit certain changes in Israeli law over the sovereignty over the West Bank and Gaza in exchange for the Palestinians rejecting terrorism. What happened? Okay. April 6, 1994, in Afula, 8 killed by a bombing. In Hadera, April 13th, 1994, 5 killed. In Tel Aviv, on the 19th of October, 94, 78 casualties on the number 5 bus. On Jaffa Road in January of 1996, 2 bombings of bus 18, killing 80, wounding 143, leading in large measure to the first premiership of Benjamin Netanyahu. Camp David, 2000, two-state solution agreed to by Ehud Barak. Land swaps, 95% of the West Bank in Palestinian hands. Yasser Arafat rejects the deal. Israel accepts the deal. At Camp David, it later, in December and January of 2000-2001, deal is re-proposed. Yasser Arafat rejects it. He says to Bill Clinton, "You are a great man." Bill Clinton says, "I am a failure and you made me one." And in response, launches the second intifada, not Bill Clinton, Yasser Arafat launches the second intifada, which leads to, hold on, about 10,000 Israeli casualties between dead and wounded from 2000 until 2005. Nonetheless, in 2008, Ehud Olmert, somewhat accidental prime minister taking office after the stroke of Ariel Sharon, proposes 93% of the West Bank to the Palestinians. The deal is rejected. These are the times that Israel has agreed to a two-state solution, and the Arabs have not. And what do the Arabs do in the wake of all of these? They commit wars. They commit atrocities. They commit acts of terrorism. And here we are in 2025, Israel having fought now a gigantic war against Hamas, Iran, Hezbollah, and Syria and Yemen, simply to preserve its own sovereignty, independence as a functional existing Jewish state. There is no peace to be had.
Thank you very much, John. And we're heading to you, Michael.
what's the dream of Zionism? There's a very easy shorthand. It's a secure Jewish democratic Israel. And obviously in the wake of October 7th, it's difficult, if not impossible, for many people to think about a secure Jewish democratic Israel that comes about as a result of two states. But the two-state option is the only thing that will achieve all three of these. And I want to I'll go through them quickly one by one. Let's start with secure. If we'd been sitting in this room 50 years ago, I'll take us back a little bit in history as well. If we'd been sitting in this room 50 years ago, all of us would have been sitting here talking about the fact that there will never be peace between Israel and Egypt. Egypt had fought with Israel in 1948, in 1956, in 1967, in 1973, had sponsored or abetted countless Fedayeen attacks from Gaza, territory that Egypt controlled. I'll venture a guess that nobody in this room would have thought 50 years ago that there would be peace between Israel and Egypt not even half a decade later. And what have we seen in the wake of that? What we've seen is that Egyptians don't like Israelis any more than they did before. Attitudes toward Israel and Jews in Egypt are still pretty terrible. But what creates a durable peace? It's an agreement. It's a border. It's being able to deal with another entity as opposed to what we have now with the Palestinians, where there's this amorphous back and forth. When we think about security, we also have to look at what we've seen over the last couple of years. Israel was attacked by Iranian missiles 3 times. And one of the lessons from those 3 volleys is that Israel's security depended on a lot of other actors, a lot of other countries. For all that Israelis want to be able to defend themselves by themselves, that's not the world we live in. And as we've all seen here in the United States, support for Israel on both sides is at risk. A lot of that has to do with the failure to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The ability of states in the region to keep on helping Israel depends in large measure on resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so from a security standpoint, obviously, 2 states carries a lot of risks. But in the long term, the only way to really keep Israel secure is to figure out how to resolve this conflict in 2 states. When we think about a Jewish state, so there are the arguments that people all know about demographics. In 2021, the IDF testified before the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee that between the river and the sea, there are now more non-Jews than there are Jews. Separation is required if Israel is going to remain a Jewish state. But that's not the only way to look at it. Israel aspires to be a Jewish state not only for Jews in Israel, but for Jews around the world. And as we know, sitting in this room full of American Jews, for many American Jews, their connection to Israel is becoming much weaker and more tenuous. And that too, much of it, has to do with the failure to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And if we want Israel to be a Jewish state in this more expansive sense, there has to be some sort of political resolution. Finally, there's the issue of Israel as a democracy. And here too, there are all the issues that are associated with Israel's military occupation of the West Bank. But there's another problem, which is that leaving aside the democratic effects on Palestinians and what it means for Israel to be democratic, military occupation is corrosive to democracy. This isn't unique to Israel. It would happen to any country. And we're sitting here now, decades after the 1967 war, a war that Israel did not want, and after an occupation that Israel did not want to have to do. But the longer it goes on unresolved, the more shaky Israel's democratic character becomes. And so is 2 states an option for today? Absolutely not. Is it a perfect option that will solve all problems? Absolutely not. It's why I never talk about a 2-state solution, only a 2-state option. But ultimately, if we want a secure Jewish democratic Israel, the only way to get there is 2 states.
Thank you very much, Michael. John, October 7 taught Israelis that the idea so many had embraced, the notion of conflict management, what we call in Hebrew, nihul ha-sikhsukh, was an illusion and a dangerous one. So if not 2 states for 2 peoples and not conflict management, what is the serious, credible, and viable alternative that can ensure Israel's Jewish and democratic character? Is it 1 state? Is it 3 state? Is it the current status quo?
The current status quo is what will be. So to address the matter as though, as I think Michael does, there is a two-state option when there is no two-state option, is to live in a world of fantasy rather than in a world of reality. If the problem is that there needs to be a resolution of this for Israel to remain Jewish and democratic, or for there to be the proper treatment of the Palestinians, resolutions require two parties to come to an agreement. And the history that I just outlined is a 90-year history of the Jews seeking agreement and the Arabs attacking them with violence and bombs and buses and cutting through fences and rapes and slaughters and hostage taking. The resolution cannot be a one-sided resolution. The tragedy of what we saw in 2023 was that the one time that Israel attempted to impose a unilateral solution through the unilateral disengagement with Gaza, the removal of all Israeli troops from Gaza, the destruction of the 3 settlements in Gaza, and making Gaza Judenrein, was 18 years of missiles and bombs, Israel protected by Iron Dome, until it became clear to Hamas that they had another path, that they could dig underground, and that they could cut through fences, they could make friends with the populations, the idealistic populations of 3 kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope, make friends with them, figure out a way to act like they were coexisting with them, draw maps of those 3 kibbutzim, cut through the fences on October 7th, slaughter the people in Be'eri and Nir Oz, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the 3rd settlement, I apologize. And of course, then rampage through the Nova Festival. That was because Israel attempted to impose a resolution, not an agreement. It was, we will separate from you. We understand you hate us. We're not going to administer Gaza anymore. We give it to you. We are leaving it to you. And what did Hamas do in Gaza once it won? It began to create the conditions under which it was in a state of permanent, though on and off war with Israel from the time that the first missiles began to fly at Tel Aviv, over 15 years, until finally they cut through the fence. And 3 major wars that happened between Israel and Gaza as a result of the missile attacks. So no resolution through a unilateral move, no resolution with the Palestinian Authority, which rejected the one major deal that was offered in 2008 after the Gaza disengagement. I don't know what option there is until there is a change in the character, personality, and spiritual understanding of the world of the Palestinian people, as there apparently was with Egypt in 1977 or 1976 when
Let's give Michael.
Sadat got on the plane and went to Jerusalem, and then there was a peace between Israel and Egypt because an Arab country said, I want peace with you.
Let's give Michael a chance to address, do you live in a fantasy, as John says, and do we have a partner?
I think that to expect there to be a 2-state resolution tomorrow or even next year is absolutely a fantasy. But that's not the question here. The question is whether there's a realistic future for it. I actually want to pick up on what John started with Gaza disengagement, because I think Gaza disengagement, there are many lessons from it. But there's one interesting thing that John said that actually I'm not sure is correct, which is that disengagement was in 2005, and that there were then 18 years of rockets and missiles. There weren't 18 years of rockets and missiles. There were 16 years of rockets and missiles, because that started not in 2005 with disengagement. It started in 2007 when Hamas, in a violent coup, overthrew the Palestinian Authority and took over Gaza. Now, what's the lesson in that? The lesson to me is that we can't look at all of these entities as the same. The Palestinian Authority is not ready for two states today either. But just as the Arab world shifted over time, just as we saw peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan, just as we saw the Abraham Accords in 2020, just as today we have Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, coming to this city tomorrow, where I don't expect there will be a Saudi normalization agreement, but there will certainly be discussion about it. We've seen these attitudes change over time, and to view all Arab countries as the same is a mistake. To view all Palestinians the same is a mistake. The reason I say there's a realistic future for two states is because I do believe that there are Palestinians that Israel can work with. They don't exist today. They aren't there in the form they need to be in. It's why we have to take what happens on the Palestinian side seriously. It's why we have to actually treat the Palestinians as if they have agency. It's why we can't just hand them something and say, this is yours now, you have to go deal with it. It's
But
why
Michael, beyond that, if we see on both societies, not only on the Palestinian society, a large majority, Israeli and Palestinian, oppose the two-state solution. In most recent polls, 60% of Israelis and 57% of Palestinians. The question is, hasn't the time come to listen to what both peoples are actually saying, rather than continuing to impose from the outside an idea that neither side seems to believe in anymore?
I'd like to agree with Mike. I think we have a very important agreement here. Things have changed in the Middle East, remarkably. Sadat was the first major change, even though that was 50 years ago. He was assassinated for it, but the peace has held. The Camp David peace has held. Over the last 10 years, or over the last 7, whatever it is, the Abraham Accords have shown a remarkable path forward for countries that were extraordinarily inimical to the Zionist experiment. We have seen change in the United States and Israel getting together and destroying in 12 days the Iranian 37 hours, really, but a 12-day war that concluded with Israel destroying and America destroying the Iranian nuclear program, with results that we don't even quite know what they will lead to. Could there be a sea change in the Palestinian understanding of how to live in the future in a world in which they accept that Israel, which is 80 years old and is now has established its existence and its permanence through this conflict over the last 2 years, exactly as Herzl would have foretold it could? Can that happen? Yes, it can happen. Israel cannot make it happen. There is not a thing that Israel can do to make it happen. It has to happen within the soul of Palestine. How that happens isn't us agreeing as part of the 20-point plan that the educational system in Gaza should change. It should change, but just like disengagement, it cannot be that it will change as a result of a top-down series of pressures from leaders of other countries. There has to be an understanding that there is a better way to live than the way that they are living now.
Michael?
And that cannot be imposed upon them.
I agree, it can't be imposed upon them. I'll answer your question too, but I want to quickly just follow up on John's point. I agree, it can't be imposed upon them, and there has to be real change within Palestinian society. But there are things that Israel can do, and I want to bring one quick historical example. We talk all the time, and especially in the wake of October 7th, when we talk about de-radicalization on the Palestinian side. We talk all the time about the examples of World War II and what happened in post-Nazi Germany and what happened in post-imperial Japan. And I think one of the important lessons from those two places is that the Germans and the Japanese after World War II, they were working towards something tangible. They weren't being told, listen, you guys have to accept temporary occupation from the Allied powers before you put your countries back together. You have to rewrite your constitutions. You have to change your education system. You have to de-radicalize entirely. You have to demilitarize. And after you do all that, at the end, maybe we'll have a conversation about what your political entity looks like at the end. Germans and Japanese knew that when they did this at the end of the process, they were going to get their states back. And so they had an incentive to do all these things. I think something important that Israel can do if we want to try and spur these critical reforms and changes on the Palestinian side is to say to them, there is an end to this process. And at the end of this process, you get the thing you want, as opposed to do these things and then maybe we'll have a conversation later.
I need to completely and utterly disagree with you on this analysis of Germany and Japan. Germany and Japan were destroyed. The regimes were destroyed. They were left in ruins and rubble. We did occupy Germany for 5 years. So did the Soviets. We occupied Japan for 7 years. We wrote Japan's constitution. We made Germany, we forced Germany to create a new kind of political system that was imposed from above and by a kind of defeat that Israel did not visit upon Hamas or visit upon the Palestinian Authority. You want to use that example? Israel should go into Jenin and, I don't know where, Jericho and Hebron and all over the West Bank and level the West Bank and then say, okay, it's time to rebuild. We're writing you a constitution. I don't think Israel should do this. I'm saying, I do not. I am saying that the historical example you're using directly violates your own hope.
Michael?
I think you were drawing some inadvertent applause. First of all, Israel has gone into
Without
Jenin.
going back to Japan and Germany, okay?
Yes.
Let's talk about
First of all, Israel has gone into Jenin.
2025.
The Jenin refugee camp is gone. We see Israel doing some of these things. And I also think that, to my earlier point, to equate Hamas and the Palestinian Authority as if they're the same and that both of them, Hamas I'm not going to argue with, are like Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, I don't think is the right analogy. But to go back to your question about attitudes of two states. So absolutely, majorities of Israelis and Palestinians right now do not support two states. And I wouldn't expect them to. As I said, I think it would be madness for a majority of Israelis to sit here today, 2 years after October 7th, while there are still remaining bodies of hostages in Gaza and say, we support two states. But what you do see in polling is that a plurality of Israelis support separation from the Palestinians. And that's not the same thing as two states, but it's the beginning of the process, and which is why when we talk about is there a realistic future, the first step is this recognition that Israelis and Palestinians should not be intertwined as much as possible. They need to separate. They need to each have their own entities. Neither of them is going anywhere, and separation is the first step. And once you accept that Israelis and Palestinians, and again, even today, pluralities of both, say what they want is separation from the other side, once you accept that, you at least have some sort of common ground to then figure out what changes have to happen and how do you get to a point where you can make it more durable and you make it into an actual two-state arrangement. Again, that's not today, but it can happen.
Thank you, Michael. John, I want to jump in with a question, if I may. As of September 2025, 156 out of 193 UN member states recognize Palestine, including the UK, France, Canada, and Australia. That's more than 80% of countries worldwide, and close to the number of states that actually recognize Israel. And even the Trump plan, with its 21 clauses, includes one affirming the Palestinians' right to statehood. And needless to say, Trump is a great ally of Israel. So is it wise that the Israeli government indefinitely ignore increasingly global calls to create a Palestinian state?
Yes. I mean, it's wise if somebody tells you that there is a storm coming and there's a 100% chance that your house will wash away in a flood and that you'd better build a flood wall in order to prevent your house from being washed away in a flood, and you don't do it because 156 satrapies, dictatorships, and human rights abusers wag their finger at you and say that that's really not the right thing to do. I don't think that you should listen to them or heed them. That is not the way the world works. If they want to live in a fantasy in which Israel may no longer exist, as most of them do, if they want to live in a fantasy that they can coddle their internal populations by indulging in the delusion that Israel can, the Jewish state can be somehow eliminated, which I think is what's behind the UN vote, they can do so. Israel is the smallest country with the largest military footprint the world has practically ever seen. It has that military footprint in order to protect itself from precisely this effort to delegitimize the very idea of Zionism and Jewish self-sovereignty. And the Trump plan is not part and parcel of this. The Trump plan says if these 20 steps are taken, it may be time to look to a Palestinian state. And with that, I wholly agree, because those steps that are outlined in the Trump plan would mean a civilizing effect on the Palestinian populace and the Palestinian polity that would make it a partner in a new Middle East that could feature Jews and Palestinians living side by side. As for the idea of separation between Israel and the Palestinians, the Oslo plan and the Olmert plan and the Camp David plan, all three presumed a separation between Israel and the Palestinians. That's what the land swaps were about. That was the idea that you could separate these populations in places that they already lived. And again, the Jews said yes, and the Palestinians said no. And they said no 3 times. So for you, 18 years later, to say this is still a viable option, I don't understand how you can look at the world as it is and the experience that we have gone through in the course of my lifetime and say that there is a partnership with the people that you want to separate from, who are saying, you know what, we're not going to agree to separate from you because our dream is to wipe you off the map. Even though you are way stronger than we are, and you are way more powerful and richer, you've gone from being the 104th richest country in the world to the 26th richest country in the world, while we have been immiserating here in poverty, and still, our hope is that you will be destroyed. Those people are the ones who are preventing the separation of the Jews and the Palestinians, not the Jews. The Jews have agreed.
John,
3 times they have agreed.
John, you mentioned viability, and that is my next question to you, Michael. When the Oslo Accords were signed, there were over 100,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank. 3 decades later, that number has grown to over 500,000. Now, even within Israel's political left, more and more voices are saying we've crossed the point of no return. The 2-state solution, they argue, is no longer viable because you simply can't uproot more than 500,000 people from their homes. So could it be that by now the 2-state solution is simply no longer feasible?
So you don't actually have to uproot 500,000 people. John referenced the land swaps that were built into Oslo and other Camp David, the 2008 Olmert Abbas talks. 80% of the Israelis living over the Green Line live on 4% of the territory. And that 4% of the territory are the Jewish neighborhoods of East Jerusalem and the 5 large settlement blocks along the Green Line. That 4%, that's the land swap. So without moving even one Israeli, you capture 80% of the Israelis living over the Green Line. And by the way, the 500,000 is just Israelis in the West Bank. If we talk about Israelis in East Jerusalem, we're adding another about 250,000. So 80% of that entire group stays exactly where they are in a 2-state arrangement. Now you're still left with 20%, and that's very difficult. There isn't a good solution. It certainly isn't going to be to go in and uproot them all by force. It's probably going to be a combination of things, from paying people money to voluntarily relocate to giving people the option to stay where they are, the same way that we are all very proud of the fact that there are Israeli Arabs who are citizens of Israel. There's absolutely no reason at all why Jews who want to stay deep inside the West Bank shouldn't be given the option to live as residents of the state of Palestine. They keep their Israeli citizenship and they stay where they are. And there may be some who do have to be moved, but I don't think that the numbers, when we look at how many Israelis live inside the West Bank, are actually a barrier to a solution in the future.
Let's stay with the numbers, because I want to ask you, John, under the assumption that a two-state solution is impossible, what should the Israeli government do with the estimated 3 million Palestinians living in the West Bank? Should it annex the territory and give Palestinians Israeli citizenship?
No. It should not.
So what should it do? And stay Jewish and
They
democratic?
don't want to be annexed. Once again, you are imposing a solution from above. They clearly do not want to be part of the Israeli national experiment. I don't think they should be. I think that would threaten the Jewish character of the Jewish state. But let's say that it were an option that were brought to a plebiscite on the West Bank. It would be rejected probably 80% to 20%. So you don't force people to become citizens of your country if I mean, I guess that's not the way anybody has ever done anything, and you can't do it that way. So again, if we live in the real world, what is to be done about them? What is to be done about them is nothing. By which I mean, I don't think, unlike many friends of mine, I do not think that Israel should annex the West Bank and claim sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. However, I do not think that Israel is obliged to do any more than it has already done. And you describe what is going on in Judea and Samaria as a military occupation. It is a very peculiar kind of military occupation, if so. It is a military occupation done entirely and arranged entirely for the defense of the Jewish populations on the West Bank. It is not a colonial administrator. It is not seeking to force the indigenous population to do things that will enrich the colonial power. It is there to protect the Israelis who live in Gilo, in the Gush, in the 80% who live there. And in fact, a lot of Israelis are, of course, often very angry or hostile about the settlers who require protection when they set themselves up in places that are beyond those boundaries, because it is a threat to the lives of the soldiers who have to protect them. This is an interesting domestic problem that is resolvable within the Israeli domestic political program, were it not for the fact that the settlers are citizens and they also have the rights to vote and they also exercise political power, and the governments are formed with that in mind. I want to remind you, by the way, everybody here, if there are people here who don't like the settlements and hate the settlements were a Labor Party project after 1967. Remember, the Likud did not come into power in Israel until 1977. The idea of settling the West Bank and putting settlements in Gaza was a Labor Party idea about how to project power closer to Jordan and closer to Egypt as a defensive and protective maneuver for Israel. This is not a fantastical Jabotinskyite, Lehi, Irgun, monstrous effort to eat up all Arab lands and take over the world for the Jews, which
John,
a lot of very left-wing Jews.
Let's see if you convinced Michael. Okay,
Okay.
Michael, could it work?
So all
Do
of that,
nothing? John's suggestion.
I don't think it could work. All of that is true. The settlements absolutely were a labor project, but let's think about what settlements those were. Those were the settlements in what's known as the Jerusalem Triangle that were meant to widen the approach from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and create security for Israel. And by the way, that's the 4% that are in the large blocks that are going to stay. The labor governments that started the settlement project for security purposes, and they were legitimate security purposes, and they remain so today in those areas, didn't contemplate what we have today. As to whether it can work to keep the status quo forever, I don't think that it can, and we're seeing it break down on a number of fronts. Whether it is the fact that more and more IDF soldiers are being diverted to the West Bank to deal with the security situation there, a problem that is only going to grow as more Israelis move deeper into the West Bank. The total population doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is where they are, and where they're going creates a much bigger security burden on the IDF. We're seeing in all sorts of ways, I mentioned the erosion of support for Israel here in the United States. We're seeing it across the world as well. And frankly, the thing that worries me the most is that we saw a horrible phenomenon here on October 8th, 2023, which is that many of us assumed that the problem was a 1967 problem, that the reason people were opposed to Israel was because of what happened after 1967. And on October 8th, many of us were treated to a really ugly reality, which is that for many people on the other side, their problem was 1948. Their problem was Israel's existence. We're sitting here today where, and I'll put a positive spin on what's happening at the UN. I'm not a fan of unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood. I don't think it's a good idea, and frankly, there's only one country that has to recognize Palestine that matters, and that's Israel. But what we're seeing from these countries is they're saying, we want to treat this as a 1967 problem. We want Israel alongside an independent Palestine. And my concern is that the longer the status quo goes on and there's no resolution, we're going to take many of these people who are still in a 1967 world, which is the world I think we want to be in, and we're going to move them over to a 1948 world.
But
in the 1948 world, there's no way out of this.
I want to jump in with a question that's very relevant to what you're saying, because 82% of Palestinians in the West Bank supported Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel in the immediate aftermath. That is 4 out of every 5 Palestinians in the West Bank. It's a shocking number. Now, critics of the two-state solution long argued that the failure to implement the Oslo Accords, that the failure was not circumstantial. It wasn't the leaders, it wasn't the timing, it wasn't the extremists on both sides. Ultimately, it was the inability of the Palestinian national movement to truly accept the existence of the State of Israel. So doesn't October 7th prove that the assessment is accurate?
They're really ugly numbers. Nobody should try to justify them or wave them away. The very first piece I wrote after October 7th was about the fact that it wasn't just 3,000 Nukhba terrorists that came over the border. We saw ordinary Palestinians coming to Otef Aza, to the communities in the Gaza envelope, and looting as well. It was something that is not justified. But to look at that and say, therefore we are fated to war until the end of time, I don't think is correct. I think that what we need to do is, A, pay attention to the Palestinians who are not saying that, and for all of the horrible, huge, deep flaws of the Palestinian Authority, the leadership of the PA is not part of that group. And I think we need to work on the things that have to be done to actually change Palestinian opinion. Again, nobody's suggesting handing them a state tomorrow. That would be suicide for Israel. But if we're talking about is there a realistic future for it, then we have a lot of things to work on. But to rule it out, I really fear dooms this Zionist project of a secure Jewish democratic Israel for good.
Michael, thank you. And I want to squeeze in another question before your concluding remarks, and that would be to you, John. While the Abraham Accords certainly proved that Israel can make huge diplomatic progress without a deal with the Palestinians, Saudi Arabia has made clear that full normalization will require movement toward a Palestinian state. So could it be that the Accords delayed but did not eliminate the need for a Palestinian state in order to get normalization in the region?
I do not believe that you should believe that the Saudi Arabians are going to be prevented from making an Abraham Accords deal by the failure to create a Palestinian state. I think that's a smokescreen and a dodge and a gambit on the part of Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi regime. In fact, I think moving aside the Palestinian Authority from this conversation, securing the victory over Hamas in Gaza, which I believe has happened, and I believe this war was an overwhelming success for Israel on all of these fronts, was the final necessary step to make the Abraham Accords possible, that in truth, in the background, in the corridors of power, in the rooms in which people actually make these decisions, what makes Israel attractive as a future partner in the new Middle East that was seen by Shimon Peres, but misunderstood by Shimon Peres, that it's Israel's showing that it is willing to do what it must do to protect itself and protect itself as the future of the Middle East in terms of tech, in terms of innovation, military, technological, helping develop NEOM in Saudi Arabia, oil fields in the Med, and fracking under Israeli sands and all of that. That is the country that Saudi Arabia wishes to emulate now, not to destroy. And it had to show, finally, this test of its mettle, its existential mettle. And if we see an Abraham Accords happen in the next year, it will be because Israel did not say, we have to go to a two-state solution, or we need to deal with the Palestinians. It's that we need to defeat our enemies and move forward into the future.
Thank you, John. Well, friends, we are heading towards the end of this debate, and very shortly we will vote. You guys will vote for the second time. But beforehand, it's time for your short closing remarks, and we're switching the order from the beginning. So, Michael, you're starting.
So I'm going to do something unconventional. I'm going to end with a joke. God goes to the US president, the premier of communist China, and the Israeli prime minister. And he says, I have to let you know that in 3 days I'm going to destroy the world. The president goes on TV. He says, my fellow Americans, I have one piece of good news and one piece of bad news. The good news is that God exists. The bad news is that he's going to destroy the world in 3 days. The premier of communist China goes on TV. He says, my fellow comrades, I have two pieces of very bad news. The first is that God exists. We were wrong. The second is that he's going to destroy the world in 3 days. The Prime Minister of Israel goes on TV. He said, citizens of Israel, I have two pieces of great news. The first, God exists. We've been right all along. And the second is that he told me there's never going to be a Palestinian state. I tell the joke because I actually think it illustrates something important, which is that in all of the back and forth over yes or no Palestinian state, we often lose sight of the larger picture. And the larger picture here is that Israel cannot exist in the world alone. It's like every other country. John is correct when he talks about the strength of the IDF and the vitality of the Israeli economy and the incredible resourcefulness of the Israeli people. And even a country like that can't exist alone. It simply cannot. And I think that unless Israel figures out a way to, at some point down the road, get to a two-state outcome with the Palestinians, then we will constantly be fighting over this two-state issue, and we'll be losing the larger picture of what is ultimately best for Israel and for its future.
Thank you, and thank you for being precisely 2 minutes. John.
Okay, I love this joke approach, so I'm going to follow you. Two Jews go before a firing squad. And the head of the firing squad says, do you have any last requests? And Sam says, I would like, please, a blindfold. And Abe says, Sam, don't make trouble. In my view, I loved your joke, by the way. I want to point that out. That's why I'm...
I have to credit,
Okay.
not my joke, Martin did it.
I didn't prepare a joke.
Okay.
See, they didn't tell me.
Anyway,
I don't have a third
I'm
joke
sorry.
now.
Okay. I tell this joke because it is a deep reflection of one part of the Jewish character, which is, can we just not make trouble? You're coming at us, you're going to shoot us, let's not make trouble. Part two of the ancillary to that is, if we only, as Jews, do some things that will pacify our enemies, we will be able to move forward in a healthy way in which they leave us alone, we are left to say the Shema and keep kosher and circumcise our children as we are bid to do, and all of that. And it turns out, as Herzl and Jabotinsky both perceived, that nearly the opposite is true. We have to make trouble, because if trouble is made for us, we have to have the power and the ability to make trouble back double for the people who trouble us. This, again, is not about the West Bank per se, but it is about the idea in the world that Jews, in their national project, that national project is conditional and can be destroyed. And if we do not commit ourselves, we here, as supporters of Israel, and Israelis who put their lives on the line every day in the Israeli national project, to the notion that the world is going to have to accept that we do not, we will exist, and we will take on the comers who say that we will not, and we will do it here in the United States when they come at us on college campuses and in our neighborhoods, that we are here, we are staying, and we're not the ones who are going to need a blindfold, and we are not going to say to each other, don't make trouble anymore, because we do not have that option. We are under threat. We are as powerful as we have ever been on this earth, and we are more under threat in some ways than we have ever been on this earth. And we therefore, we are obliged for our children and our children's children to make it clear to the world that the Jews are here to stay and that Israel is here to stay. And if that involves finally...
I do not have a buzz. I don't have a buzzer.
Okay, but
it's...
Okay, let me just...
We're past our 2 minutes.
If we do not get to a point, we can get to a point at which there is a two-state solution. When what I just said is accepted by the Palestinians and by the world entire, and we will not until it is.
Thank you very much, John and Michael. Now comes the moment that our audience is going to vote for the second time, and I'm very curious to find out how many of you changed your minds, how many of you were persuaded by the opposing side, it will take a few moments. So while you are voting here in the audience, we will take advantage of that time for a rather unusual thing in these times of heated debate, and I will ask both of you in a minute or so to say one good point that you heard expressed by your opponent today. Do you want to start?
Sure. This is not hard for me. John said a lot of things that I agree with. I'll actually do two. One is that I think he's 100% right, that Israel can't do this by itself. It's not going to be able to just snap its fingers and create two states even if it wants to. It requires real work on the other side, and it is not in Israel's power to do on its own. And I think the sloganeering about, and the occupation now, or if Israel were to just do A, B, and C, this would be done, that is absolutely a fantasy. And so I think that's a great point. And then second, what you closed with, agreed as well. Until the other side absolutely and implacably accepts that Israel is not going anywhere, then we're not going to get to two states.
That's very generous of you, because I asked for one good argument, you gave us two, and we're on to you, John.
That was very generous of you, and I will say that in the fundamental sense, I don't think that we disagree. I think what we disagree with is a timeline, or maybe a question of what policy provisions need to be adopted at present or in the near future. I do not see much hope for policy prescriptions in the near future that will lead to Israel and the Palestinians living in peace side by side in two states. I do believe that if we pursue, and I believe that, as you suggest, if we pursue this with an idea that the time for this is in the future and that things need to happen in the future to lead to that prospect and that possibility, that we will reach that eventually. I don't know if it's going to be in my lifetime, to be frank, but I believe Israel is eternal. I believe Jerusalem is its eternal capital, and I believe, therefore, that we have the time necessary to get to this final end that you yourself see.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Michael. And as we wait for the results, it will take just a few more moments. I would like to thank all of you as well, our engaged audience. It's hard to be open-minded these days to opposing ideas, especially in these kinds of delicate issues. And let's see the results now. So, as we can see, we certainly have a winner. Congratulations, John. The needle has moved from yes in the first vote, 47%, it went down to 33%, and from 53% saying no in the first vote, we've come to 67%. Thank you very much for a terrific debate. Shalom and toda.
This concludes the afternoon
That was a
program.
great-
Please
I've
consult
never
the
heard that
conference
joke
app for this
before.
evening's events and receptions. See you for breakfast tomorrow morning, beginning at 7 a.m.
בקרוב תזרח השמש, נדע ימים יפים מאלה, הלב נלחם בדאגות. כולם יחזרו הביתה, נחכה להם למטה, הלוואי נדע בשורות טובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד